Here's a fact that most people find deeply uncomfortable. Being poor is not just difficult, it is structurally expensive. Not expensive in the philosophical sense. Expensive in the literal, mathematical, dollars and cents sense. The American economy runs two entirely different price menus, one for people with capital and one for people without it. And the menu for people without capital costs significantly more for almost every identical product. Economists have a name for this. They call it the poverty premium. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a bank fee, a rent payment, or a gallon of milk the same way again. Let us start with something most people assume is a fixed cost: groceries. A household earning $30,000 a year does not buy food the same way a household earning $150,000 does. The higher income household buys in bulk. They have a Costco membership. They have a chest freezer in the garage. They buy the 12-pack of paper towels in August, and they are set until November. The lower income household buys what they need this week, sometimes what they need today. They pay per unit, not per volume. And per unit pricing is almost always worse. The price difference is not trivial. Studies tracking unit pricing across income brackets have found that households buying in the smallest package sizes pay between 20 and 40% more per ounce for staple goods than households buying in bulk. On an annual grocery budget, that gap can exceed $1,000. $1,000. Not because of bad choices, because of package sizes. And groceries are the charitable example. Now, let us talk about the actual financial system and what it does to people who cannot afford a buffer. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation estimates that approximately 5.9 million American households are entirely unbanked. Another 14.1 million are underbanked, meaning they have a checking account but still rely on alternative financial services for core transactions. That is roughly 20 million households. What does alternative financial services actually mean? It means check cashers, payday lenders, and rent-to-own stores. The FDIC estimates the average unbanked American family spends $969 per year just on fees to access their own money. $969 in fees to do the things a bank account does for free. But the problem does not stop at the unbanked. Even inside the banking system, the structure punishes low balances. Overdraft fees averaged $35 per transaction in 2024, according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The median overdraft transaction was for a purchase under $24, so a household paying for a tank of gas with $3 less than they thought they had is charged $35 for the privilege of discovering that fact. In a given year, American banks collect roughly $12 billion in overdraft and non-sufficient funds fees. The majority of that revenue comes from a small slice of customers, accounts with average daily balances under $350. The banking system is, in structural terms, a system where the poorest customers subsidize the services used by wealthier ones. There's a concept in engineering called technical debt. It refers to the shortcuts a development team takes now that they will have to pay back later, with interest. The American household with a strained budget is running a version of this constantly, and nowhere is it more visible than in transportation. The median American car payment in the first quarter of 2025 was $816 per month for a new vehicle. The majority of American households cannot afford that payment, so they buy used and they buy cheap. A 15-year-old vehicle purchased for $4,000 has a higher likelihood of mechanical failure than a 3-year-old vehicle purchased for $22,000. That is simply the physics of depreciation. The problem is that mechanical failure is not an equal opportunity event. A household with $4,000 in savings absorbs a $1,200 transmission repair as an inconvenience. A household with $280 in savings absorbs the same repair as a catastrophe. Because they cannot pay the $1,200 today, they do one of several things. They finance the repair at interest, often through a shop that charges 20 to 24% APR on a credit card. They miss work because they cannot get to their job, or they defer the repair until the problem compounds into a more expensive one. A wheel bearing that costs $350 to replace at a mileage of 90,000 becomes a replacement axle at 100,000 miles, costing $980. The same physical problem, at a different stage, is nearly 3 times the cost. This is the reliability tax. The household that can afford maintenance pays for the part. The household that cannot afford maintenance pays for the part, plus the compounding of everything that broke while they were waiting. There is also a geographic dimension to this. The Brookings Institution has tracked the relationship between residential neighborhood and vehicle reliability costs, and the correlation is uncomfortable. Households in lower-income zip codes pay between 16 and 22% more for auto insurance than demographically comparable households in higher-income zip codes when controlling for driving records, not because of risk factors the individual controls, because of the risk profile of their neighborhood. Let us run the numbers on housing, because the numbers are clarifying. According to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, approximately 12 million American renter households spend more than 50% of their gross income on rent and utilities. The standard financial advice is that housing should consume 30% or less of gross income. But for these 12 million households, the math simply does not work. The apartment they can technically afford is in a location or of a quality that makes other costs higher. Here's the arithmetic that matters. A household renting in an outer suburban area with poor transit access pays lower nominal rent than a household renting near a job center, but they also pay more in transportation costs to get to work. The Center for Neighborhood Technology has documented that low-income households in car-dependent suburban areas spend an average of 27% of household income on transportation, compared to 13% for households in transit-accessible areas. The cheaper rent costs more when you factor in the cost of accessing it. There is also a comparison that most financial coverage avoids because it is uncomfortable: the rent versus own calculation, done honestly. A household that owns a home and pays a $1,500 mortgage per month is building equity. That same monthly payment, 30 years later, converts into an owned asset. A household that pays $1,500 per month in rent for 30 years has spent $540,000 for the right to live in a place they do not own. At no point in that 30 years did their payment build toward an asset. The reason more American households do not own is not a failure of desire. It is a failure of down payment. The median down payment on a first home purchase in the United States in 2024 was 13% of the purchase price. On a median-priced home of $422,000, that is approximately $55,000 in cash that a household must produce before a bank will lend them the rest. Saving $55,000 on a household income of $60,000 after taxes, rent, food, and transportation takes the average household approximately 14 years, assuming no disruptions. In those 14 years, the household is paying rent, and the household that managed to scrape together the down payment 2 years earlier is building equity every month. The gap compounds. In 2013, Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir published a book called Scarcity, which documented one of the more uncomfortable findings in behavioral economics: that operating under conditions of financial scarcity consumes measurable cognitive bandwidth. The research they cite suggests that the mental load of managing a tight budget, tracking whether the rent payment will clear before the grocery charge, deciding between the copay today or the electric bill tomorrow, is cognitively equivalent to losing roughly 13 IQ points. Not a permanent loss, a situational one, but a consistent, measurable reduction in the capacity for planning, impulse control, and decision quality. The implication is not that poor people make bad decisions because of some inherent characteristic. It is that the structure of financial precarity generates the conditions for decision degradation. The same person, with the same intelligence, under financial stress, makes measurably different and measurably worse decisions than they do under financial stability. The poverty premium is therefore not just an external cost. It generates an internal cost. The household under financial pressure is paying more for groceries, more for banking, more for transportation, and simultaneously operating with a degraded capacity to notice, plan around, or escape any of those costs. Here is the single mathematical intervention that addresses most of what we have discussed. A financial buffer of $1,000 eliminates most overdraft fees. It allows a household to buy the larger package of paper towels rather than the per-unit expensive small one. It pays the $350 car repair before it becomes the $980 axle replacement. The research on this is surprisingly precise. The Urban Institute, in a study of low to moderate income American households, found that households with as little as $2,000 in liquid savings were materially better at absorbing financial shocks than households with zero, and that the presence of that buffer correlated with reduced likelihood of missing a bill payment, reduced likelihood of taking on high-interest debt, and reduced likelihood of employment disruption due to transportation failure. $2,000. In a country where the median checking account balance is around $450 for the bottom income quartile, $2,000 is the line. The problem is that Crossing that line requires, by definition, producing more income than you consume. And the poverty premium has systematically increased the consumption side of that equation without touching the income side. The grocery premium costs you roughly $1,000 per year. The banking fees cost you $969 per year. The transportation premium costs you hundreds more. The total cost of being financially vulnerable in America is not a few $100s of bad decisions. It is several $1,000s per year in structural surcharges that wealthier households simply do not pay. The poverty premium is not a metaphor. It is a line item. And once you understand that, the conversation about personal finance stops being a conversation about habits and becomes what it always should have been, a conversation about arithmetic. Understanding money is your best defense.